Koto, and welcome to 10 Great Games Workshop Games. Now, the thing is, I'm not going to just limit this list to games that were made by Games Workshop, or by Warhammer, or whatever the hell they're calling themselves these days. In fact, I'm going to open it up to games set in the Warhammer worlds, made by other people, because some of the very best Games Workshop games weren't made by Games Workshop. But if you are a fan of Warhammer and Warhammer 40,000, and you love Games Workshop's design and aesthetics, you really should check them out if you can. Also excluded from this list are the tabletop miniatures games, because, well, they're not really fitting the definition of board game in the sense that I'm using it here. So that's no Warhammer 40,000, no Warhammer Fantasy, no Age of Sigmar, no Epic, no Warmaster, or anything like that. The other thing I'm going to exclude are the skirmish games. Any game that really requires a lot of terrain or scenery and can't just be played with the contents of the box. And that's things like Mordheim and Necromunda. But Jay, you can play Necromunda with the terrain in the box. Yeah, not the point. Anyway, we're looking at board games, either made by Games Workshop or made using Games Workshop's IP. And just before we get onto the list, a couple of these games were sent to me as review copies. You'll note that when I'm talking about them, a little gift box will pop up in the corner of the screen. And with that small disclaimer out of the way, let's get to the list. A couple of honorable mentions of games that other people have told me are really good, but I haven't played. The first honorable mention is Warhammer Conquest, the card game, and the second one is Forbidden Stars. Heard a lot of good things about these games, especially Forbidden Stars, but I haven't played them, I can't comment on them. On to number 10. Somewhere between a skirmish game and a board game, you have Warhammer Underworlds. And Underworlds is the sort of game that Games Workshop really excels at. It highlights the miniatures that they sell and harkens back to the games like Necromunda and Mordheim, but makes it a more self-contained experience. And probably the coolest thing about Underworlds is you can turn up with your gang, with your deck of objective cards and power cards, and just start playing against an opponent. And there's a little bit of customization in there. You can design your deck of cards as well as your gang that you're bringing along. This all combines for a skirmish game that is deep enough to be enjoyable, but easy enough to just pick up and play. And of course you get a lot of fun painting the models, but it's a game where you don't necessarily need to be a painter. You can just put down your army, start playing, and have fun with it. So if you're someone who wants a Games Workshop game because of the cool models in it, but you're intimidated by the sheer model count of a game like Warhammer 40,000, definitely take a look at Warhammer Underworlds. And another great thing about Warhammer Underworlds is the game is quick to set up, it's quick to play, so it is really good as a lunchtime game. Number 9 is one of Games Workshop's most venerable titles, and that's Talisman. And I'm including with this Relic, which is the 40k re-theme of Talisman. Now, Talisman is not a deep game. It's not complex. It's busy and there's lots to do and lots to explore, but it's not a game where you're going to be number crunching and thinking too hard about it. You roll some dice, you move somewhere, you turn over a card, and something happens. And a lot of people are critical of Talisman for being that, but for me, that's the damn point of the game. It's not supposed to be deep. It's supposed to be a light, fun adventure game. And we still play Relic with my group of friends who are serious gamers. And we play it on nights when we're all too tired to really think, oh, shall we play Terraforming Mars or Spirit Island or something that's going to hurt our head? No, we play Relic because it's easy to play, because it's enjoyable, it makes stories happen, and you know what? Sometimes you just want to roll some damn dice. Number 8 is another venerable Games Workshop title from back in the day when they did stuff that wasn't directly connected to either Warhammer 40,000 or the Warhammer world. And that is Fury of Dracula. Fury of Dracula is a one versus all hidden movement game. One player is playing Dracula and they have to survive for 2 weeks, moving hidden around Europe. The other 4 players are different investigators trying to track him down and murderize him. I believe Fury of Dracula is on its 5th edition and has been in print in one form or another for quite some time. Even when Games Workshop stopped doing all of the non-Warhammer stuff, they put it out to Fantasy Flight Games to do a new edition, and I believe the most recent edition is with WizKids, although I could be wrong. Fury of Dracula is considered by many the best hidden movement game on the market. I think it's okay. I think an expert Dracula player is really, really hard to play against in it, but especially when they get all the upgrades and extra bonuses, but it's one of those games that just tells a story. And it's fun from either side, whether you're playing as the investigators trying to figure out where the hell Dracula is, or whether you're Dracula there, you know, crapping your pants a little because you're absolutely positive they're going to catch you next turn. If you are a fan of hidden movement games and classic horror pulp tropes, definitely check out Fury of Dracula. Number 7, Space Marine Adventures Rise of the Orcs. Now this might seem like an odd title to just chuck into a list because the Space Marine Adventures games are kind of light. They're almost targeted at kids more than they are targeted at the standard Games Workshop audience. They're very rules light and, well, they're just fun. Like, you go back to the 90s and Games Workshop tried putting out light versions of some of their hit games. Things like Crunch, the light version of Blood Bowl, and almost universally they stunk. So when I saw Space Marine Adventures, I was like, this is probably going to be like a crappy version of Space Hulk. Turns out it's absolutely not. This particular version of Space Marine Adventures is like a tower defense game. You're a group of 5 Terminators from like the 5 most well-known chapters, and there's just a horde of orcs coming at you, and you blast them with your assault cannon, you hit them with your thunder hammer. It's simple, but it's fun, and the small model count in it is fine. They're really easy to assemble, but they're good things. And it's one of those games that if you're intimidated by all of the scale of Warhammer 40,000 and Warhammer Fantasy and Age of Sigmar, if that's not your jam, but you like some Space Marines and you want to shoot some dudes, Rise of the Orcs, like, if you can get your hands on it, it's a fun little game and something I'm definitely going to be keeping. Because, you know, there's something to be said for a game that's easy to learn, approachable, family friendly, and just a good fun time. Not everything has to be big and serious to be awesome. Now, part of my background is wargaming, you know, the old SSI and Avalon Hill style chit and counter war games. I used to love playing those. And I also used to play a lot of Games Workshop games back in the late 80s and early 90s. And at that time, they put out a game that was almost tailor-made for me, and that was Battle for Armageddon. Now, Battle for Armageddon is a hex-based chit and counter war game about the orc invasion of Armageddon. Now, this is a very storied part of the Warhammer 40k setting. It introduced characters like Commissar Yarrick and Ghazghkull Thraka, who are very, very big characters if you follow Warhammer 40,000 at all. And what it was essentially a light Avalon Hill style war game. But instead of the German invasion of Russia, it's the orc invasion of Armageddon. And that's the funny thing, is it is exactly the German invasion of Russia. When you look at the map and you look at how the game plays out, that's exactly what they've modeled it on. The defense of the main hive at the bottom corner of the map, that's Stalingrad. Commissar Yarrick is a Russian commissar transported into a 40k setting, and the Nazis are orcs, and, you know, that's just kind of funny to me. This was one of 3 games in this sort of series. It was also, I think, Doom of the Eldar and Horus Heresy, which was based on the invasion of the Imperial capital. And that brings us to number 5, Horus Heresy. But not that one. The Horus Heresy I'm referring to is a remake done by Fantasy Flight Games. And it's all about the Siege of Terra, which is another, possibly most important, pivotal moment in all of the Warhammer 40k story, where Horus the Great Usurper leads his legions of Space Marines who have turned to chaos to attack the Imperial throne and take out the Emperor himself. Where the Emperor fights Horus in a final battle and is mortally wounded and has to be put into the Golden Throne, where he remains for 10,000 years. And this game depicts that great battle. And it's really clever. It's a really, really clever game. One thing I really like about it that stood out to me was you can take a limited amount of time to put orders flat down on the board and then another little bit of time to resolve them. So if you plan ahead, it's quite time efficient. But if you play an order straight out of your hand, it costs way more time. And the way the time count works is you take actions until you pass your opponent, then they get to take actions. So if you take a big 3 action and move ahead, well, your opponent can take multiple small actions and get things in place before you can react. It's a really clever, responsive war game. It's also one of those games where I'm like, why are you not trying to market and sell this in the Horus Heresy books? Why does Games Workshop, put out these licensed IPs and then kind of forget about them, where they could possibly, reinforce them or do something with them? A little frustrating when you talk about the Horus Heresy books, which are hugely popular, and you go, oh yeah, we played the game, and people just have not heard of it because it was never sold in a Games Workshop store. But anyway, there's probably copies floating around of it. If you do want a game about the Siege of Terra, there's a few historical inaccuracies in it because they decided to have a few legions there that probably shouldn't have been there, just so they could have the balance of Khorne, Nurgle, Slanesh and Tzeentch in the game, but you know, it is what it is. It's a fun game and a genuinely good scale war game set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. If you're watching this video, you've almost certainly seen this video.
HeroQuest is the best game ever made, and anyone who says otherwise is wrong.
And while that is possibly the best board game review ever made, I'm going to have to disagree. HeroQuest is in fact not the best game ever. It's not even the best game in the Quest series, and I'm going to lump all those games in here now. So HeroQuest, Advanced HeroQuest, Warhammer Quest, Blackstone Fortress, the Quest family of games. And of those, I think Warhammer Quest is actually the best of them. Which Warhammer Quest? Well, I'm thinking the original one that came out quite a while ago, not the new ones that are coming out, especially not Cursed City, because that one seems to have disappeared. I have a review copy of that. I'm not sure I can review a game that just isn't available anymore, but you know, I'm going to have fun with it at some point. But just a weird deal having this game come out, we're going to market it, and then no, it's not available. You know, this game doesn't exist. Strange. But anyway, the Quest series is pretty much the definitive dungeon crawling experience. It's genre defining. Starting with HeroQuest, which was a huge game. It was one of the first hobby board games to be available inside department stores and toy stores, and it exposed a heck of a lot of people to the Warhammer sort of idea for the first time. Because it's not really set in the Warhammer world, or maybe it is, but it doesn't feel like it's that set in the Warhammer world. The barbarian and the dwarf and the elf and the wizard, they just seem very generic fantasy. Moving on to Advanced HeroQuest, which is very much set in the Warhammer world because its primary enemy are Skaven. And finally onto the Warhammer Quest and the later reboots of that. Warhammer Quest is a massive franchise and it's a really good, solid dungeon crawling game. The newer ones have amazing figures as well, but if you're looking for a good off-the-shelf dungeon crawling experience, it's really hard to go past the Warhammer Quest series. Number 3 might be Games Workshop's best designed game, and that is Space Hulk. And why Space Hulk is so good is it's just such a solid core idea. I mean, it's heavily borrowed from Aliens. Let's be honest about that. It's Marines versus aliens on a ship. There's guns and stuff. But mechanically, it's so simple, yet so deep and so rewarding to play. The whole thing is a 2d6 system with limited action points. And how you use those action points and your bonus command points as the Marine player to set up Overwatch fields and rapidly move Marines into position to complete objectives. Meanwhile, as the Genestealer player, you're trying to huddle your forces and misdirect and then overwhelm a weak spot. You're always searching for that one Marine whose gun you can jam so you can pile on them and murderize them and then start moving on. A lot of games from the late 80s and early 90s have dated terribly. They've got a lot of jargon, a lot of tables and extra rules, and they just don't fit too well with a modern audience. Space Hulk could have come out today. It's so simple at its core. And I think that's one of the reasons why it endures as a really popular title. And this is some of my best painting, I think. Some of the best miniature painting I've ever done was for Space Hulk 3rd edition. Number 2, it's Blood Bowl. Yeah, probably no one's going to be surprised if Blood Bowl is high on this list. If you don't know, I've been playing Blood Bowl on and off since 1989 or so. I started off with the 2nd edition, moved to 3rd edition, and played it all the way through the Living Rulebook years, and even have the new edition as well. Blood Bowl is, simply put, an amazing game. It's a unforgiving and merciless game, but it is an amazing experience if you have the time and energy to commit to it, because this is not a game that is forgiven. A single mistake in Blood Bowl, you're screwed. It is one of the most harsh, unforgiving and brutal games I've ever played, which is probably why I keep coming back to it, because it is harsh. It is a mean game. It doesn't hold your hand and say, oh, here's a bunch of ways you can get out of this. No, you make a roll, you stuff it up, that's it. It's the other person's turn, and they're going to make you pay for your mistake. So it's all about risk management, figuring out what moves you can do and what actions you can take without rolling a dice or rolling dice that are heavily loaded in your favor. And you have this limited pool of rerolls as well. And yeah, sure, you can always just roll 4 ones in a row and completely screw something up, but that doesn't happen that often. Well, it shouldn't. It feels like it happens more often than it does, but it shouldn't happen that often. And an extra thing with Blood Bowl is it's also spawned 2 other fantastic games that I'm lumping in under this as well. The first of those is Blitz Bowl, which is a fast-paced, shorter format of Blood Bowl. A bit like Warhammer Underworlds, this is a lunchtime duration game and allows you to get the feel of playing some Blood Bowl, but without the big commitment that Blood Bowl requires. And again, it's also got a lower model count, so it's easier for people to get into. And the highlight system means that you're constantly engaged and involved in what's happening in the board state. Turns just fly by. It's a really sharp game. And the third game included under this is Blood Bowl Team Manager for Fantasy Flight Games, which is sadly out of print and probably not coming back. This is a great simulator for managing a Blood Bowl team. It's a deck building game where your deck is your team of players and you're trying to get really good star players so you can play them onto different highlights, manipulating the ball around, blocking other people, inflicting injuries, and it provides the feeling of playing a full season of Blood Bowl in one session. Arguably, this is my favorite Warhammer related game out of all of these, even the one I'm going to put at number 1. But I feel because it's a Blood Bowl inspired card game, it didn't quite stand on its own here. I had to talk about the Blood Bowl family. Now, this is not an easy game to get these days secondhand, but if you do like Blood Bowl, you like the whole setting and feel of Blood Bowl, and you want to play a board game about running a team, definitely track it down. It is a great little game. I think the second expansion is like ridiculously expensive though, so maybe just get the core game and don't spend hundreds of dollars getting the second expansion. Unless you really want to, in which case, you do you. It's not like I had 10 of them sitting in a box here to sell you. God, I wish I had 10 of them in a box to sell people. And last, and definitely not least, is what I think is the best board game created in the Warhammer universe, and that is Chaos in the Old World. Now, why Chaos in the Old World is such a good game is it's about the old world, and the 4 of you playing are the 4 different Chaos gods: Khorne, Nurgle, Slaanesh, and Tzeentch. And it's an area control game where you're moving your pieces around the board until each section of the board gets too saturated by blight, and then you score it, and then that part of the board is useless now. It's not worth it, so you have to move your troops somewhere else. The game ends after a certain number of areas have been blighted like this. But what makes it a standout game for me is that the Chaos Gods feel like the Chaos Gods should, and their interaction between each other feels like how the great battle between the Chaos Gods should take place. Khorne is a complete bastard. He just gets his points by murdering everyone else. So everyone's nicely stacked together. Here comes Khorne, axe is going, and he just starts chopping people down. Nurgle's all about piling into one area and just saturating it with blight, with lots of cheap disposable forces. Slaanesh is all, no fighting, deflections, and stopping people from using their benefits. And Tzeentch is just a dick. He's just a teleporting, manipulating dick of a person. So if you're the kind of person that likes to see people trying to do things and go, oh, yeah, I'm going to swap my pieces with your pieces and then send these things over there, you really enjoy playing Tzeentch in this game. And there is an expansion that introduces the Horned Rat as well, and they sort of fit in as a 5th player, like, quite well. They don't feel like they're part of the dominant 4, they just feel like they're sort of skirting around the outsides doing their thing, which is appropriate for the Horned Rat. Chaos in the Old World also spawned a bunch of games like Blood Rage and Rising Sun that have gone on to be incredibly successful. Now this one's sadly also out of print, which is a crying shame because it is a fantastic game, and if you are a Warhammer fan, and in particular a fan of the Chaos Gods, definitely try and track down a copy. Alright, that brings us to the end of our list. Let me know what you think in the comments. Are there any games that I've missed that you thought were really great? Are there any of the games that I've rated too high for you? What sort of games do you think Games Workshop should be doing? How do you think they're managing their licenses, putting out these games and then not really supporting them? Would you like to see games published by other publishers from the Warhammer world inside Warhammer stores? Let me know your thoughts on all of these in the comments below. And a reminder that 3-Minute Board Games does not do paid content. And if you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to the channel.